Project Rogue. My feeble attempt to give my addiction meaning by categorizing as many roguelikes as possible so that I may find more roguelikes that milk my brain of dopamine in just the right way. The process is a sort of gamer taxonomy. Charles Darwin, you know those line chart things that try to sort out what evolved from where into what. I don't care much for pedigree. I'm not searching for a true roguelike. I'm searching for a better way to search for roguelikes. I must at this point. There's a consistent enough stream of games coming through that get my attention simply by being labeled as roguelike, roguelite, or having roguelike elements, but they rarely turn out to be what I anticipate. Sometimes that's a good thing. The problem comes when I try to find another game similar to that game where simply being labeled roguelike will no longer suffice. For example, you've got games like Slay the Spire, Hades, Spelunky, Faster Than Light, all having the tag of roguelike and roguelike accessories, but being very different from one another. That's where I want to get more precise. If I say I like Slay the Spire and I'm looking for another game similar to it, maybe Monster Train, maybe Loop Hero, maybe Darkest Dungeon, I'm not going to go looking for Enter the Gungeon. Or perhaps I am searching for Enter the Gungeon type gameplay, so I look for Wizard of Legend, maybe some first-person shooter type controls, Gunfire Reborn. It's not just about finding things that are more the same, but also keeping things fresh. So here we go. Because all of the games will be relative to each other, there is no right or wrong place to start. I'll go ahead and start on my personal favorite, The Binding of Isaac, and define the things that I believe make the game what it is. And I will be lumping all of the iterations together. That's the first Binding of Isaac, that's Rebirth, Afterbirth, Repentance, and everything in between, because essentially the game's core identity has stayed the same. Firstly, the controls are inspired by old Legend of Zelda dungeons. This game operates as a top-down dungeon crawler. Surely the way a game plays is important enough to warrant an identifying feature. It's not third-person, it's not a platformer, it's a top-down dungeon crawler. At any given moment, I'm playing as a single entity with notable exception. These are all variations of Isaac I can choose from, each with their own set starting stats, items, and passives, with notable exception, of course. They differ enough from each other to provide each run with a different starting theme. The endgame is where most of the characters will end up resembling each other due to mass accumulation of modifiers to their tiers. Keywords I'd use here are varied character stat starts. You're not playing the same character every time, and it's also not a class-based system. For the environment, it all takes place inside of a room with varying, procedurally generated hazard types, obstacles, and rewards. There's spikes, there's flames, there's goo, there's poo, there's goopy poo, explosions, and enemies up the wazoo. And there are various varying degrees of variation of all the things that can kill you. Parameters are set for organizing rooms next to each other and then procedurally generated to create a dungeon. So there is randomness inside of the randomness, so you can random while you random, offering itself to who knows how many different permutations. High degree of procedural environmental generation. Continuing the topic of environment brings us to the environmental traversal. How difficult is it going to be to get from one point to another? When I enter a room, the door is closed behind me, but there are ways to get around that through teleportation, bomb effects, or staying in a room for too long. To go from one floor to the next, I have to defeat a boss with the exception of floor teleportation or trapdoors, and to beat the game I have to kill a boss. Bypassing content is possible, but more to the point of being an exception instead of an expectation, so at best I would say BOI uses a soft bypass system. Being able to bypass content seems like an odd feature to have, especially given these days boss fights are quite the staple. Well, it stems from the first roguelikes ever made in the 1980s. The objective was to go into a dungeon, get an item, and escape with it in whatever way I could possibly imagine. Basically, if I had the intent to run past everything, could I? If yes, then that's a hard bypass system. Why does it matter? Personally, I find a varying degree of fight or flight keeps things interesting. Do I fly through everything for the boss rush? Am I going to be as thorough as possible? Should I start blowing doors down because I'm too weak or too strong for a room? Pacing is key, and having the ability to adjust the pace accordingly is quite sexy. Now, as far as consequences go, we're operating under a permadeath system with an absurd amount of unlockable meta progression. When you die, you start over from ground zero, but now you have new toys that you've unlocked that you can find, new enemies, new areas, etc. Beating X boss with Y character is like 50 achievements alone, and all of them will give you something new to play with. I love how the system is mostly delivered in a way that makes me feel as if I've earned something new, instead of feeling like I earned something that should have already been mine. I say mostly because there are a few repeat actions I performed, such as killing Mom's Heart 11 times just so I could unlock more of the game. I've had many a run end where I'd essentially become God, stop short at an arbitrary limiter to give me a new ending. I'll stop that train of thought short there because it's not a review of the game. It's not about what I did or didn't like. It's about what I think is core to the identity, and having an overflowing cornucopia of unlocks in this fashion I believe is pretty key. Now for the juicy bits, the loot and how it interacts with the gameplay. Every item, aside from notable exceptions, has a set effect, but they're rewarded randomly. This means every time I come across the same item, I know exactly what that item will do, but there's no guarantee I'll always find the same items. The wafer will always try to reduce damage taken to a half heart. I may not always get it. Where this gets funky is the items work as modifiers. Everything from my movement speed to the amount of coins I have to my tiers, everything can be modified. Even modifiers can be modified. I have no idea how many synergistic combinations exist on top of the synergistic modifiers that induce a transformation. I can one-shot everyone, one-shot myself, shoot a stream of mass murder and chaos, or hit like the Pillsbury Doughboy. Sometimes a combination of items will cause my death. Most of the fun and skill expression comes from experimenting with different combinations of items. One of the most addicting features to be included in any roguelike is the game letting things get absolutely asinine. It doesn't always grant me the power of God in anime. Sometimes I do have to finish a run honestly, but it makes that moment all the sweeter. That moment when my immersion is completely broken due to the sounds my PC is making when I start blasting. And there's another tail to pin on this donkey in the form of the deals with the devils and the angels. To get a deal with the devil, I have to make it through the second floor boss fight without taking too much red heart damage. Afterwards, a chamber will open up with items that I can only purchase by trading in my heart slots. I'm losing health here. High risk, high reward, potentially. For an angel deal, I'm required to make a devil deal spawn, not take it, get through the next boss fight without taking too much red heart damage, and then I get my prize. So on one hand, you have immediate cost and risk for potential high reward. On the other hand, you have to attempt to sort of prove yourself worthy of the angel deal. There's a chance I don't make it to the bargain. There's a chance I die immediately after taking the deal, and once the run is over, I lose the items. I live for mechanics that let me take more risks for a higher payoff. I cling to challenges that reward you accordingly. And that should just about cover it. Don't forget about the curses. Oh, sure, really. That's the thing holding me back from enjoying other roguelikes. They don't have that one mechanic that randomly shafts me by hiding my UI or changing the map around. No benefit whatsoever, pure detriment. That's how I like my coffee. Yes, The Binding of Isaac has other features. There's greed mode, there's difficulty settings, there's seeding, leaderboards, and an active mod community. But these are auxiliary, these are accessory. If The Binding of Isaac did away with these things, would it still not be The Binding of Isaac? But if you genuinely feel I missed a core feature, go ahead and throw that into the comments. And while you're down there, if you feel there's a roguelike that tremendously shares these features, go ahead and leave that in there too. I have roguelikes galore, but I'm trying to not get ahead of myself here. Until next time, I've been Frost, you've been Other, and this has been The Binding of Isaac.